How soldiers tricked the enemy with their flag. The year was 1781, and Colonel William Washington had just received orders that made his stomach drop. His unit, outnumbered, undersupplied, and exhausted, was tasked with holding a critical position against a British force 3 times their size. His men had rifles. Yes. They had courage. Absolutely. But what they didn't have was a cannon. And the British knew it. General Cornwallis's scouts had already confirmed it. No artillery. No heavy weapons. The Americans were, by every military calculation, sitting ducks. Washington called his officers together under the cover of darkness. The campfire barely flickered as he laid out the intelligence report. His second-in-command read it twice, then looked up slowly. "They're going to walk right through us, sir." Washington didn't respond immediately. He stared into the fire for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, the words sent a chill through every man in that tent. "Not if they think we have something we don't." Nobody understood what he meant. Not yet. But Washington had just conceived one of the most audacious battlefield deceptions in American history, and it all depended on a single object they didn't even have. What Washington had planned was so absurd, so dangerously simple, that his own officers thought he'd lost his mind. By morning, Washington's plan had a name among the men: the Quaker Gun. The idea was devastatingly simple. If you don't have a cannon, make one. Not a real one. A fake. A log, roughly hewn, painted black, and positioned behind the fortifications at exactly the angle a real artillery piece would be aimed. His men thought he was joking. One soldier reportedly laughed out loud before realizing the colonel wasn't smiling. Because here was the brutal truth Washington understood that his men didn't: wars are not always won by the side with the most weapons. They are won by the side that controls what the enemy believes. The British scouts watching from the tree line would see cannon barrels. They would report cannon barrels. And a general who hears the Americans have artillery, it does not charge forward the same way a general who hears they have nothing does. Washington ordered the logs carved overnight. 12 of them. Each one painted, each one placed with surgical precision to be visible from exactly the right sighting lines. But as dawn broke and the last log was set into position, a rider came thundering into camp, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. The British weren't waiting. They were already moving. And they were moving faster than anyone had anticipated. With the British advancing, Washington made a second decision, one even more reckless than the first. He ordered his men to raise a flag. Not their flag. A flag that didn't exist. Washington had heard that a fresh Continental regiment, the 3rd Virginia, was rumored to be in the region. Rumored, not confirmed. No one actually knew where they were. But the British didn't know that either. He ordered his seamstress and 2 soldiers to stitch together a regimental flag bearing the insignia of the 3rd Virginia. A unit that, for all anyone knew, could be anywhere, or nowhere at all. The flag went up alongside the fake cannons, just as the first British advance scouts reached the ridge. Washington watched through his spyglass. He could see the scouts stop. He could see one raise his hand to halt the column. He could see a messenger break away at a full gallop back toward the British main force. They saw it. They're reporting it. But Washington's spyglass also revealed something he hadn't expected, something that made the blood drain from his face. One of the British scouts wasn't riding back. He was riding forward. Straight toward the American position. Alone. The lone rider was a British intelligence officer, a man whose entire career was built on not believing what he was supposed to believe. His name, according to later accounts, was Captain Edmund Reeves. And Reeves had a reputation. He had exposed 2 previous American deceptions in the Carolinas campaign. He was, by all accounts, precisely the kind of man Washington's plan could not survive. Reeves rode slowly, deliberately, studying the American fortifications with the calm professionalism of a man who had done this before. He stopped just outside musket range. Close enough to see. Too far to shoot without starting the very engagement Washington was trying to delay. Washington watched. His officers watched. Nobody breathed. Reeves raised his own spyglass. He looked at the cannons. He looked at the flag. He looked at the troop positions. He lowered the spyglass. Raised it again. Lowered it. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his thul bag and pulled out what appeared to be a written ledger, a reference document of some kind. He opened it. Looked at the flag. Looked at the document. Looked at the flag again. Washington's adjutant leaned in close and whispered, "He is checking the regiment's insignia against a reference guide. Sir, if that guide is accurate." Washington cut him off. He already knew. If Reeves had an accurate reference for the 3rd Virginia's regimental colors, the entire deception would collapse in the next 30 seconds. And the flag they had stitched together in the dark, Washington suddenly realized, had been made from memory. By a man who had only seen the 3rd Virginia's colors once. 6 months ago. The color of the crest. That was the problem. Washington's seamstress had stitched the central crest in gold thread. But the 3rd Virginia's actual crest, if Reeves's reference guide was accurate, was silver. A small difference. Nearly invisible at distance. Nearly. Washington did the math. Reeves was approximately 200 yards out. At that distance, through a spyglass, on a cloudy morning with the flag moving in the wind. It was 50-50. Maybe worse. He turned to his men. He could order a shot fired to drive Reeves back. But a single shot would trigger the very British advance he was trying to prevent. He could lower the flag. But that would be more suspicious than leaving it up. There was, Washington realized, nothing he could do. The next 30 seconds would be decided entirely by wind, light, and the quality of a British officer's eyesight. Reeves stared through the spyglass for what every American present later described as the longest minute of their lives. Then he closed the ledger, turned his horse, and rode back toward the British line at a canter, not a gallop. The canter of a man who had confirmed something, not the gallop of a man who had discovered a lie. Washington exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. But Reeves was now riding directly toward the British commanding general. And whatever he said in the next 5 minutes would determine whether Washington's men lived or died. Washington needed to know what Reeves was reporting. And he had exactly one asset who could get close enough to find out. His name was never recorded in the official dispatches. History knows him only as the boy from Guilford, a 16-year-old civilian scout who had attached himself to Washington's unit 3 weeks earlier. He knew the terrain. He knew how to move through it. And he was, Washington later wrote, entirely without fear, which I attributed more to youth than to courage, though perhaps they are the same thing. Washington gave him simple instructions: get within earshot of the British command position, hear what Reeves reported, and return. The boy slipped into the tall grass at the edge of the American position and disappeared. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Washington's officers began exchanging glances. At 30 minutes, one of them suggested the boy had been captured. At 34 minutes, he came sliding back through the perimeter, grass-stained and grinning. He had heard everything. Reeves had reported to the British general that the American position appeared to be held by at least 2 regiments, supported by no fewer than 8 artillery pieces, and that an assault without significant reinforcement would be, in Reeves's exact words, an unacceptable hazard. The British general had ordered his force to hold position and wait for additional troops before advancing. Washington had bought his men time. Days, possibly. Enough time for actual reinforcements to arrive. The camp erupted, silently, because sound carried, in the kind of celebration that happens when men who expected to die suddenly realize they might not. But Washington wasn't celebrating. He was staring at the boy from Guilford with an expression his adjutant couldn't quite read. Because the boy had also heard something else. Something Reeves had said quietly, almost as an afterthought, just before walking away. "Tell the general," Reeves had said, "that I am not entirely satisfied. I would like one more look. Tomorrow, at first light, before the mist clears." Washington absorbed this in silence. Reeves wasn't convinced. He was suspicious. He had reported what he saw because he couldn't prove otherwise, but he intended to look again, under better conditions, with better light. In the morning, in clear air, at first light, the fake cannons would look like what they were. Logs. And the flag, even with the wind, would show its colors clearly enough for a careful man to check them against a reference. Washington had one night. He gathered his officers and laid out the problem with characteristic bluntness. We fooled them for one day. We need to either be gone by morning, or we need to make the lie bigger. Making it bigger meant acquiring, by dawn, something they had absolutely no access to, a real cannon. Or something so convincingly real that even Edmund Reeves, standing in clear morning light with his ledger open, would believe it. One of his officers, a former blacksmith from Pennsylvania named Sergeant Elias Thorne, had been quiet through the entire briefing. Now he raised his hand slowly. "Sir," he said, "I have an idea. It's going to require everything we have. And it might get us all killed." Every officer in that tent turned to look at Thorne. And when he explained his plan, half of them immediately said it was impossible. The other half said nothing at all, which was somehow worse. Thorne's plan was built on a single piece of intelligence the Americans had that the British didn't know they had. 3 miles south, abandoned since the previous year, was a British supply depot. It had been evacuated quickly during an earlier American advance and, according to a local farmer who had traded with Washington's scouts, never fully emptied. Specifically, 2 iron cannons, damaged but visually intact, had been left behind. Too heavy to move quickly, too broken to fire, but there. Real metal. Real iron. The kind of thing that looked exactly like what it was. Thorne proposed a night raid. Take 40 men, travel 6 miles round trip in the dark, drag 2 iron cannons back through rough terrain, and have them positioned before first light. The problems were numerous. The depot might have a guard detail. The cannons might be gone. The terrain was brutal. And if the British sent a night patrol, standard practice before a potential engagement, Washington's men could walk directly into it in the dark. Washington looked at the map for a long time. Then he looked at Thorne. "You led this kind of operation before?" "Once, sir. In 79. "Did it work?" Thorne paused just a half-second too long before answering. "Most of it did." Washington made his decision. Thorne and 40 volunteers would move out at 10 o'clock. They had 6 hours. At 3:47 in the morning, a single gunshot cracked in the darkness to the south. Then silence. Then nothing. For 2 hours, nothing at all. Washington spent those 2 hours in a state his adjutant would later describe as the stillest fury I have ever observed in a man. He did not pace. He did not speak. He stood at the edge of the perimeter and stared south into darkness. At 5:15, 45 minutes before first light, a shape emerged from the tree line. Then another. Then the unmistakable silhouette of men hurling something large and heavy through the dark. Thorne had made it back. He had lost one man, shot by a depot guard, non-fatal. The soldier was being carried, and had acquired not 2 but 1 cannon, the second having been destroyed by its previous owners before abandonment. But 1 real cannon, positioned correctly, alongside the 12 fake ones, would change the geometry of everything Reeves would see in the morning. They placed it at the center of the line, the place the eye goes first, the anchor around which everything else would be judged. At 6:02, as the mist began to thin, Reeves appeared on the ridge again. Washington watched through his spyglass. Reeves was methodical. He started on the left flank and worked right. He checked each position carefully against his ledger. Washington tracked his progress. Left flank. Left center. Center. Reeves stopped at the center. At the real cannon. He stared at it for a long time. Then he did something Washington hadn't expected at all. He smiled. And then he turned and rode back to the British line without looking at anything else. The British did not advance that day. Or the next. By the time reinforcements arrived, American reinforcements had arrived too, real ones, and the strategic situation had changed entirely. The action Washington had feared never came. Edmund Reeves, in his personal diary, discovered 2 centuries later in a London archive, wrote the following entry for that date. Examined the American position again this morning with full light. The central piece is genuine iron. I could see the casting marks from the muzzle. The flanking pieces are almost certainly wood, painted. The regimental flag is wrong, the crest coloring is off, and the spacing of the design is inconsistent with any 3rd Virginia standard I have on record. The force is almost certainly smaller than my original report suggested. I have decided not to amend my report. A general who believes he faces a strong position is cautious. A general who learns his intelligence officer was fooled by logs and a badly stitched flag does not remain cautious. He becomes eager to prove the original report wrong by attacking immediately. The Americans are tired. But they are not beaten. Sending our men against them today, for a position of limited strategic value, because my general's pride demanded we correct an embarrassing intelligence error. This is not a trade I am willing to make. I was deceived by 1 real cannon and 11 wooden ones. I will carry that quietly. Washington never knew that Reeves had seen through the deception. He believed, until the end of the campaign, that his ruse had been completely successful. In a way, it was, just not for the reasons he thought. The lesson that echoes across centuries is not simply that deception can win battles. It's something more uncomfortable, that sometimes the enemy sees exactly what you're doing and chooses to let you win anyway, because the alternative costs more than the deception is worth. The flag told a lie. The cannons told a lie. But the man on the other side of the spyglass told the biggest lie of all. And nobody ever knew. The Quaker gun tactic, using fake artillery to deceive enemies, was used multiple times throughout American military history, including famously during the Civil War. The art of strategic deception remains a core element of military doctrine to this day.